We're in Joshua chapter 8. Chapters 7 and 8 actually work well together. A lot of preachers will actually treat chapters 6, 7, and 8 as a single unit of thought, as one movement. They'll do one sermon on it, but I wanted to dedicate specifically chapter 7 by itself as a sermon alone, because sometimes I just feel like we see sin and failure and just kind of fast forward through it. I didn't want to do that. I wanted us to kind of sit through that difficulty, the kind of the pain and the of the purging of sin, and to kind of sit on that and see where God leads. And so today we're in chapter 8, and today is really kind of the second fight, the rematch, if you will, of Israel and the city of Ai. And so that's what we're going to see. What we're going to see is Joshua, Achan, and Israel, they go through this deep failure, and God has them go through this process of purging and repenting. And then after that, God then brings in chapter 8 restoration. Today is all about restoration. It's all about renewal. And this is the beauty of the gospel. We need both chapter 7 and chapter 8 because it's about both sin and grace. The gospel is incomplete without each other. We can't just fast forward to grace, because then you cheapen grace. When you cheapen grace, you make church out to be a fast food restaurant. You come and go and you give your few bucks on the dollar menu and you're on your way out. But church, that's not what grace is. Grace is not cheap. It is absolutely precious and costly. And it drives us towards deeper obedience. And we know that because that's why Jesus died on the cross. Jesus died on the cross not because of cheap grace, but because it is costly. Amen? So when we get to chapter 8, it's the beautiful aftermath of God's wrath. What we're going to see in chapter 8 is Israel's conquest of Ai, and this is all about, again, God restoring his people. And so here's just kind of a general outline or flow of the kind of points that I'm going to make. So what happens when God restores his people? First, there is affirmation. When God restores his people, there is first affirmation. And then second, when God restores his people, there is obedience. And then if you're taking notes, under that category of obedience, I'm going to point out 3 other implications. Okay? And then third, when God restores his people, there is a recommitment. And so I'm just going to go right through chapter 8, and I'm going to highlight for you the important things that we need to hear. So the first thing that we see is that when God restores his people, there's affirmation. I'm going to read this again. Go to verse 1. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear and do not be dismayed." Sounds familiar. "Take all the fighting men with you and arise, go up to Ai. See, I've given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city, and his land. And you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves. Lay an ambush against the city behind it." So remember this? Remember, you go back to chapter 1, 3 times we see God commissioning and calling Joshua, "Be strong and courageous." It says that 3 times. And so it's a very similar thing happening here. God says, "Do not fear and do not be dismayed," which is essentially the same thing. And so why? Why would God tell Joshua the same thing? If we're not careful, we can almost treat it as if God is kind of nagging Joshua. And Joshua's saying, "I know, God, I know." But that's not quite what's happening here. God doesn't do random things, and he doesn't nag like we might think. Nowhere in the Bible do you see God ever apologizing for nagging. Nowhere in the Bible do you ever see God saying, "Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, you already knew, didn't you? My bad." God never says that. And so sometimes, church, it's the stupid, simple truths of the Bible that we have to pay attention to. Sometimes it's these stupid, obvious truths that we have to pay attention to. What do I mean? When God says something, it's because it needs to be said. It's almost like, P.H., are you insulting my intelligence? It's almost like I'm being sarcastic, right? God said it because it needed to be said. Duh, right? No, but that's not what I mean. God said it because Joshua needed to hear it. God commands Joshua, "Do not fear," because Joshua think about this, in his post-season of failure, he needed to be reaffirmed in that. Do you hear me, church? In other words, do you ever fail so hard in your life that you don't know how you're going to get back up? Do you ever fail so hard in your life that you don't know how you're going to make your way back? Everyone has a story, right? Everyone has a unique set of struggles. Everyone has a different definition of what is failure and what is success. But the fact remains, failure is failure. And sometimes we fail so hard that spiritually we don't know if we can ever make it back quite to where we used to be. In this den of grace, in this land of grace, in this place of grace where we can again be once again restored. And so it's the kind of failures that's so intense that it brings you shame. It's the kind of failures that make us run away from God and run away from community. And the text here doesn't explicitly say that Joshua felt shame and guilt, but there must be a reason that God says this. Be strong and courageous. There must be a reason. And so, how would you have felt if all of Israel gets punished because of your leadership? How would you have felt? What kind of burden do you have to carry on your shoulders when a man is literally stoned and burned by fire because of your sin, because of your lack of leadership? You got overly confident. You didn't trust in God and hear God's call like you should have. You trusted in yourself. You got too cocky and arrogant, and then you lost. You lost 36 of your men, and now Achan is now stoned and burned by fire, and all of Israel is blamed because of your sin. Talk about failure, right? Talk about shame. How do you ever stand up to speak to your people ever again? And so I think in speculation, I think it's safe speculation to say that Joshua is going through this season of failure. And there is shame and there is guilt. And I think some of us really need to hear this. All of us need to hear this, but I think some of us really need to buckle down and understand the kind of failure, the kind of sense that Joshua is going through. Maybe you are going through a season of failure in your life, and it's difficult because no one likes coming out admitting that. No one likes coming out and saying, I'm insecure because of my failure. I think when I talk about failures, I'm not talking about insignificant small failures that everybody kind of struggles with. I'm talking about the failures that have to do with your integrity. Like you've been living a lie season after season, and now it's finally catching up to you. I'm talking about the failures that have to do with sexual purity. The kind of thing that no one really knows about. The kind of thing that you do in your own time, in your own dark space of life, something that you do or you shouldn't have done with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, something that you don't like to share about. I'm talking about failures that have to do with your responsibilities. You have just not been being faithful to the resources that God has given you season in and season out. Like you're doing life the way you're supposed to do, but you're not quite faithful. With school, with church, with familial responsibilities, whatever it is. I'm talking about the kind of failures that have to do with these small sins that you commit every day on a regular basis. And now those small sins have blown into something else and it's become addictions. The difficult thing about those kinds of failures is that they are debilitating. They handicap us. They make us stuck. The kind of failures that I'm talking about are the kind of failures that make you feel incapable. And it becomes harder and harder over seasons because you don't share it, you don't shed light on it. And so the temptation here is to see Joshua's failure, Achan's failure, and Israel's failure, and then we just want to move along as if nothing happened. But the reason I call that a temptation is because if you don't see Joshua's failure, Achan's failure, Israel's failure, and you just want to fast forward through it, you're going to do that in your own life. These debilitating failures that we go through, we can't just fast forward through them. Because if you don't recognize that deep sense of failure and shame and guilt that's eating you alive, that's debilitating you, then how can you go through a process of restoration? You can't be restored unless you see your need for restoration. So hear me when I say this, because some of you actually might disagree with me. Failure is a fact of life. Failure sometimes needs to precede success. When you fail, notice when I said, when you fail, the point isn't you failed. That's not the point. The point is, how will then you be moved on towards restoration? That's the point. And this is a huge part of the Christian life. We have to understand that we're going to mess up. The question is not if, but the question is how, or the question is when. So why not just be honest with ourselves and see how God is seeking out our restoration? Because out of that sense of failure and out of that sense of shame, what does God say? Here in Joshua. It's like we have to go back to chapter 1 and we have to see the emotional context. The emotional context that how God is speaking to Joshua. Joshua, be strong and courageous. It's time to get past the mistakes and failures. But God, I'm scared. What if I fail again? Joshua, be strong and courageous. It's time to get past the mistakes and it's time to move forward. But God, what if my people don't listen to me anymore? Joshua, be strong and courageous. You messed up, okay. Let's move forward now. Let's seek out restoration. Do you see that kind of dynamic happening here? And so listen to how God restores Joshua. He says, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. Notice that God isn't speaking in the future tense. Do you see that? God does not say, I will give. He says, I have given. Livestream, listen to me. I'm not trying to make a big thing out of it. Okay, maybe I am. I am making a big thing out of this. Okay, but this is huge. This little grammatical observation, huge. When God restores his people, he does the work. Okay? That's what we hear from this. When God restores his people, he's the one doing his work. I had lunch recently with someone from the EM, I won't say who, but this person I had lunch with, nice little lunch, and this person was telling me a bit of a struggle that this person is having with school, and this person says, I have to work with a partner in school, and this person isn't pulling her weight, and so I have to now do most of the work, right? And so this group project all of a sudden becomes a solo project. You feel me, church? And that solo project is messed up because you're the one doing all the work when your partner just has to show up and get credit. Can I get an amen? For those of you that didn't say amen, you're the lazy ones, by the way, okay? Because you don't feel me when I say that, okay? That's how it works. And I'm hearing this person share about the struggles of school and group projects, and I'm like, man, I hear you. I really do. Right? Because I'm usually the one, literally, in all my years of schooling, I've experienced that. Literally since elementary to junior high to high school to college to grad school, I've experienced that over and over. I'm the one doing the project because I don't want to get a bad grade. So this group project turns into a solo project, right? And the only thing the other person has to do is show up and then they get credit, right? Church, listen to me. In the same way, but to a much greater extent, this is how God works. In the same way, but to a much, much greater extent, this is how God works. In this group project called restoration, it's not really a group project. It's a solo project where God does all the work. All we have to do is show up and we get credit. I know that won't sit right with some of us because some of us need to earn our keep. Some of us refuse to believe that has nothing. We don't want to be the lazy person where we just show up and get credit. But church, that's what grace is. Grace is when you show up and the grace is already restoring you. And God is saying to Joshua, I have given the land to you. You just got to show up. And church, this is all over the Bible. This isn't just one little half a verse in Joshua 8. When God gives the 10 Commandments to his people, what does he say? Something that we conveniently take out. I have already delivered you out of the bondage of Egypt. Do you notice that? When God gives the 10 Commandments, it's not before he delivers, it's after he delivers. After I have delivered you from the bondage of Egypt, now here are your 10 Commandments, which are no longer than conditions, but they are now also descriptions. You have been delivered, so now this is how you live. You know, when Jesus Christ died and then he resurrected, who does he specifically ask for? Peter. Tell Peter specifically that I have risen, after Peter denied Jesus. Talk about failure, right? God is saying to Joshua, I have already done the work. And God affirms that by reminding him of his promises that they hold true. I have given into your hand, Joshua. You just have to show up. Just do what I tell you to do, and the work is done. Some of you need to hear this. The thing that you did yesterday, the sin you committed for the 100th time last month, the thing you said, the thought that you had, the lie you told, that time you mistreated someone, that irresponsible thing you did, God isn't holding it against you. Hear me, church. God is not holding it against you. If there is repentance, if there is a grace-driven, spirit-filled desire to obey and to pursue holiness, God is saying, my promises to you are true. God is saying, I want you to get back on track. I want you to be restored in your relationship with me. If you believe that, say amen. Yeah, we need to wake up. We're falling asleep here. First, we see God restoring Joshua and his people through affirmations. And so we just saw the failures of Israel. Now we're going to see the obedience of Israel. There's a couple principles, 3 principles about obedience that we're going to see here. So Kennard just did a phenomenal job reading the entire chapter, so I want to highlight for you a few verses. Here's the first principle about obedience. Obedience is about obeying God even when it doesn't make sense. Verse 3. So Joshua and all the fighting men arose to go up to Ai. And Joshua chose, 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them out by night. And he commanded them, behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city behind it. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you remain ready. It's so cool that he chooses 30,000 mighty men of valor. Now, I won't make a huge point of this, but I will say, church, if we want to conquer our city of eyes, we need men of valor. We need men who are going to be strong and courageous and to explore uncharted territories for the sake of the kingdom of God. The Bible points it out. We need mighty men of valor. So what do we see here? What happens this time around is that instead of taking 3,000 men, because that's what Joshua did out of his arrogance, he takes 30,000 men. 30,000 men of valor. And Joshua doesn't just go in with 30,000 men and just start swinging his swords Rambo style, right? What does he do? He sets up an ambush. Now, it's a little unclear in the writing, I think, but I think what's happening is out of the 30,000 men, what Joshua does is he takes 5,000 men and he camps out near Ai. Okay, I'm going to be animated because we're falling asleep here, okay? Ai, okay, 35,000 men, right? He camps out near Ai, all right? And the king of Ai sees that, and they're like, oh, look at these chumps, they're at it again. Let's go get them, right? And so he's like, let's go, gang, right? And he goes, right? And the men of Ai go, I'm estimating, this is purely my guess, right? Later we see 12,000 men and women. So I'm guessing 5,000 men. 5,000 men from Ai. They go out and they attack these 5,000 Israelites with Joshua. And Joshua says, oh, we're scared. We're going to be run over again and get killed. And so they run away. And then what happens? The other 25,000 Israelites, they set the whole city on fire. That's what's happening here. Okay? So imagine that. There's a level of ingenuity here. There's a level of genius warfare happening here, because what happens if you are fighting, if you are following the king of Ai, you're an Ayin, I don't know how you say that, Ayin, I don't know, right? You're an Ayin and you're fighting with your king, and in the thick of the war, you're like, are we going to win? Are we going to lose? You look at your king for like a burst of confidence, and he's going at it, and you're fighting, you're like, we're going to win this war no matter what it takes, and you're like, someone smoking a cigar, what is that? Is that a cigarette? What is that? You look back, my home is on fire. La Palma is on fire. What, you know what I'm saying? So what does that do to you in the thick of the warfare? What's the point of fighting? Win or lose, we have no home to go to. Win or lose, it's lose. So from Joshua's perspective, it's absolutely genius. But here's what I want to point out, and this is about obedience, right? Why in the world do you need to strategize against 5,000, speculation, 5,000 men from Ai? You have 30,000 men strong. Here's what I'm thinking, okay? You all know Little Taylor? That's what's up, right? Y'all know Little Taylor. I love the little guy, right? A rambunctious, high-energy guy. He's, I believe, Ivy and Irene's cousin. And he just made his way into the kids ministry, but he's basically an EM member, right? He's just around all the time. I'm going to sign him up for covenant membership soon. This little kid is high energy. He's running around all over the place, right? So imagine, right? This little kid, Taylor, he is the city of Ai. Okay? Who is Israel? It's Greg. Okay? So it's fight night. Greg versus Taylor. Okay, it's Israel against Ai. I love Taylor. I'm not saying anything bad against him. Just for illustrative purposes, let's just say it's fight night. I'm excited. I'd rather watch this fight than the Super Bowl. I send out Facebook invitations. Right, I get food, the whole shebang. Right, everybody, let's watch this fight. And then pre-game, right, we're interviewing Greg, and we're like, Greg, what's your plan to take out little Taylor? Right? And he goes, I got a few things up my sleeve. He goes, you don't even know, right? He's all getting pumped up. He's all getting amped. I got all this strategy. I got all these tricks up my sleeve. We've been watching films, a little Taylor, right? I got him, right? There's no way he could do anything. And I'm thinking, what in the world do you need strategy for, right? Pound him to oblivion. You know what I'm saying? You're literally 5 times his size. What do you need strategy for? What in the world does Joshua and Israel need strategy for? Literally 5 times as many men as they do. It's not even a fight. It's over before it's over. You see, this is what the Word of God is communicating to us. It is all about obedience. God, why in the world do I need to take 30,000 mighty men of valor and set up an ambush? Joshua, that's not the point. If I'm going to give you victory, it has to be my way. That's what God is saying. Don't showboat. Don't rely on numbers. Don't act like you got it all under control. This is my fight. And church, this teaches us something about obedience. Obedience doesn't depend on what makes sense to you. Obedience doesn't depend on how you feel or what kind of season you're going through. And listen to this, obedience doesn't even depend on rationale. You cannot outsmart God. Obedience is about hearing God's voice in your life and following it with a deep trust in His plan. Whether you have 3,000 men or 30,000 men. So obedience is about obeying God even when it doesn't make sense, but obedience is also about a concrete decision. Obedience is about making a concrete, tangible decision. Look at verse 18. Then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand toward the city. So real quick, this should remind you of something. This is reminiscent of the story of Exodus when Moses is fighting the Amalekites. Very significant battle for Moses. This is the first time the Israelites ever fight, ever. And I was actually going to go off on this whole thing about Moses and Pharaoh, but I'm going to save that for Logos this Friday, so come out. But this is almost like Moses and the Amalekites 2.0. Okay, it reminds us of something. Moses is raising up his staff, and as he does that, Israel will prevail, but when he gets tired and he gets weary and he starts lowering his staff, that's when the Amalekites will prevail. See, this is like a mirroring image of that. But instead of a staff, Joshua has a javelin. Now, this is what I want to point out. Go to verse 26. But Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. All the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. Now, historically speaking, I think you understand something about the culture of war. War is never pretty. It's not pretty today. It wasn't pretty back then. What you see in history books, what you see in movies, a lot of times, they're just kind of glorified pictures of victory, but you don't see the aftermath. You don't see all the evil things that happen behind the curtains. And what I'm talking about is the culture of warfare is a lot of times soldiers will fight hard and they will put everything on the line, right? A lot of times they'll say for God. A lot of times they'll say for king, for country. A lot of times they'll say these things. But then what happens when you win is that part of your reward is to go in and take in whatever you want. Whatever you want, including women. And this is one of the brutal and evil sides to warfare that many times is overlooked, unfortunately. Historically, soldiers would conquer a people, they would rape their women and kill their children. Now, Joshua could have done this. He could have conquered the men of Ai. He could have taken the women and then kind of sort of fudged the numbers. You know what I'm saying? A win is a win. A win is a win. We conquered all the men of Ai, right? God has given us the city of Ai. Okay, now we can kind of do what we want to do. Because a half win is better than no win at all. That is what we call, church, compromise. That is what we call fudging sin and blurring the lines. But he knows very clearly what God commands in verse 2. God says, only its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves. And Joshua knows that if his men went in and took the women of Ai, it would be a defamation to the holiness of God's people. God didn't want his people to intermarry or have sexual relations with outside nations. And so what we're seeing here is Joshua's commitment to complete obedience. When you strive to obey God, church, listen, go all the way. Don't compromise. Don't blur the lines of sin and holiness. What we see here is that obedience is a commitment to completely destroying sin. Joshua compromised. If Joshua compromised and he didn't obey all the way, it would have been a very different story. And it's interesting that the Bible would specifically point out that what did Joshua do? He raised his javelin. He raised his javelin until the job was done. How long does it take to wipe out 12,000 people? How long does it take to sit there or stand there with your javelin over your head and watch 12,000 people get killed? A long time, church. This is before modern warfare. This is before you can have some thing in the sky drop a bomb, like a little thing, and then 50,000 people die, okay? This is some video game, right? You have to go old school style, right? And kill people one at a time. 12,000 people, it takes time. And so what does this imply? I'm not going to make a whole big point of this, but I want to point out for Joshua to hold that javelin over his head as he's pointing it to Ai and he's watching 12,000 people slaughtered. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, and it takes discipline. Obedience, church. it takes discipline, it takes sacrifice, it takes discomfort, and it takes a bit of pain. It's not a sexy thing to talk about at church, is it? But obedience is about changing your will to the conformity of God's will. We don't like that message, church. We like the kind of message where God says, I love you, do whatever you want. But if there's going to be restoration, there has to be sin and grace. There has to be restoration and obedience. Obedience is uncomfortable, and it requires discipline. And obedience doesn't just happen. If you want to obey God, there has to be a willful, concrete decision to say, okay, this is what holiness is, and that's what I'm going to pursue. And just to be clear, I think there's maybe some questions about what exactly does it mean to be obedient. You see, the Bible gives us principles. And the Bible is sufficient for faith, and the Bible is sufficient for salvation. You don't need anything else, anything other than the Bible to have salvific knowledge of the gospel. You don't. But when the Bible gives these principles, what happens is through your prayer life, as you seek out God in a personal relationship, God starts to fill in the blanks and fills in the gaps through your prayer. And so when you understand God and His promises and His character through His Word, and then you back that by prayer, church, that is what we call conviction. When Bible study, when knowledge of God's Word is backed by prayer through a personal relationship with God, that turns into conviction, and that's what fuels you to say, okay, I'm going to decide, I'm going to make a decision to follow God in obedience. It's going to hurt, it's going to be painful, it's going to take discipline, but man, I'm down. So obedience is about obeying God. Second, obedience is about making a concrete decision. But obedience is also a response to grace. I'm going to read some verses to you, and I'm going to go off a little bit. You got to hang with me, okay? Verse 24. When Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the open wilderness where they pursued them, and all of them to be the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the edge of the sword. And this is where it gets real. And all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. But Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city Israel took as their plunder according to the word of the Lord that he commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it forever a heap of ruins as it is to this day. And he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset Joshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree and threw it at the entrance of the gate of the city and raised it over a great heap of stones, which stands there to this day. We got to think here a little bit, church. Here's my question for you. Why does God have Joshua conquer lands so ruthlessly? Why does everyone have to die? Why do some people receive God's mercy and some don't? If you're not churched or you're not a Christian, and you come to church and you happen to read this passage, that's not going to sit right. That's my guess. And even for a lot of Christians, this is hard. That's why we don't like reading the Old Testament, because we don't have answers to this. What happened to the God of love? So the big question is God really just? I mean, if this narrative is a reflection of God's attribute and character, and this is all about God doing the work, then this comes out of who God is. So is God really just? It's hard reading about destruction on an entire city and then believing that God is actually just. I think part of the reason we like comic book heroes is because there's a lot of these heroes who have gone through some traumatic experience of injustice. Bruce Wayne, for example, if you know his story. I'm talking like he's a real dude. It's just make-believe, right? But Bruce Wayne, right, he's coming back from something at night with his mom and his dad, and some guy murders his parents, both his mom and his dad, in cold-blooded murder. And so that fuels him to serve the justice of the city of Gotham. And that microscopic picture of Gotham, right, gives us some kind of hope that there are Batmans in this life. And even spiritually speaking, right, even if we don't experience real justice in our lifetime, we know that in the grand scheme of things that there will be justice in the end. Right? And that helps us. That gives us encouragement. That gives us a hope. That gives us a way to not just say, I give up. What's the point? That gives us something to live on. Right? Maybe you don't think about this, right? But that's why comic books a lot of times, a lot of things even animated, that's why they're so popular. Right? Ultimately, it's about justice, right? That just made sense to me. They're called the Avengers. Well, okay, sorry. Now, we love justice, right? But there's a catch. The catch about justice, and this is indicative of our human condition, it's that we want justice until we are the ones who are brought justice upon. I'll say that again. We want justice until we are the ones that justice is brought upon. That means get him, he deserves it. But when you deserve it, you're like, that's injustice, I don't deserve this. When clearly it's the same thing. So when you think in terms of justice, or when you think in terms of right and wrong, good and bad, there's this temptation we have, especially in our culture, to make things subjective. And if you've been with me for some years, you know that I talk about this, right? Subjectivity versus absolution. You see, the idea of subjectivity is whatever you think is right, whatever you think is wrong, right? That's really easy to believe because it empowers the individual. Do you see that? It empowers the individual to say, this is what I believe to be true, so it must be true, and you're not allowed to tell me otherwise. So subjectivity is tempting because it's politically correct. Subjectivity is tempting because it minimizes offending people. You're not allowed to tell me that homosexuality is wrong. You're not allowed to tell me that going to church is wrong. You're not allowed to tell me that any of these things are wrong because I as an individual have power to decide. So even as Christians, you may not hold to moral subjectivity, but you're probably tempted to. So I'm going to be straight with you. Belief in God and belief in His Word isn't consistent with moral subjectivity. You cannot believe in both. Believing in God's Word is believing in an absolute. It's belief in an absolute God who then must have an absolute Word. Now here's my point. If you believe in God's absolute Word, then you must believe that there's an absolute holiness. You must believe that there's an absolute morality, an absolute standard. You have to believe that there's an absolute sense of right. And if there's an absolute sense of right, then there's an absolute sense of wrong. God doesn't simply come up with random rules to make our lives harder. Rightness comes out of the very character of God. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, what? Say it louder. In the beginning, God. Not righteousness. Not man. Not subjectivity, not me. In the beginning, God. And then everything else flowed out of God. So what does this mean? Who are we to judge God? Who are we to stand here with Joshua 8 in front of us and say, this is not just? I'm not saying you shouldn't think critically. I'm not saying be blind and just say God's Word is God's Word and have a calloused heart. It's okay to have compassion on the dying people. It's okay to have compassion on a people who are the victims of God's wrath. In fact, that's what drives us to evangelize. But I think that truth resets our entire paradigm of what is fair. If God is perfect and God alone defines what is good and right, then the next point of truth is that anything less than absolutely perfect is completely imperfect. Church, in a world of perfect and imperfect, where do we stand in that spectrum? If there is only good and there is only evil, if there is only perfect and imperfect, there's no 53% perfect and the rest is, no, there's none of that. If there is perfect and imperfect, where do we stand? Romans 3:23, what does it say? For all have sinned, fall short of the glory of God. Except me. No. All have sinned, fall short of the glory of God. And what is the result of sin? Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Now, that means everyone deserves death. Everyone. And so if we're going to ask the question about justice and fairness in the Joshua narrative, then let's ask, what is actually fair? Everyone deserves death and destruction. Everyone. Israelites deserve death and destruction. The city of Ai deserves death and destruction. Joshua deserves death and destruction. Abraham deserved it. Isaac deserved it. Noah deserved it. King David deserved it. Adam and Eve deserved it. The Apostle Paul deserved it. The Apostle Peter deserved it. The disciples, the church, the New Testament church, which is us, we deserved it. The fact that anyone is given the opportunity to be saved by grace and grace alone, church, that does something to us. The question isn't, why am I saved and not everyone? The question is, why am I saved? Why would God save anybody? And so to make that grace thing subjective and to make this cheapened fast food dollar menu kind of thing, we're missing the point. God doesn't have to do anything to anybody. The fact that there is a Joshua 8 and not just Joshua 7 and 9, the fact that there is a second chance given to God's people says something about grace. Grace is not deserved, it is given. Why do we need to have a biblical understanding of sin? Because sin shows us our need for grace. God's love means nothing until you need it. So when God restores us, there's affirmation and there's obedience. And lastly, there's a recommitment. And this is where I'll land. Verse 30. At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. I'll stop there. Now, it's amazing. This comes straight out of Deuteronomy chapter 27, okay? Maybe we'll actually unpack that this Friday, okay? I'm not going to go heavily into it. This is literally Deuteronomy 27. God says literally to Moses, okay, when you cross the Jordan, do this. And so Joshua is carrying out the command that God had given to Moses years back. It's really cool. When you read Deuteronomy 27 and you read this, it's like this sense of completion that God is doing. Now, here's what's happening here. There's two mountains at work, okay? There is Mount Ebal and there is Mount Gerizim. And I need you to use your imagination a little bit, okay? These two mountains define the landscape of Israel. So if you are looking at Mount Ebal and you are looking at Mount Gerizim, you know that you're in the land of Israel. Hear me, church. You know when you're in between these mountains, you are in the land of grace. You look at these mountains and you say, I am home. I know it sounds a little cheesy, right? But I am home. I am with God's people. As for some reason God has chosen me to be in this land of grace, I know I'm home. Now, Mount Gerizim would be the mount of blessing. Mount Ebal would be the mount of curse. So this isn't about heaven and hell. You are chosen. You are going to heaven. You are saved by grace and grace alone. The question is not whether you're going to heaven or hell. The question is, in this lifetime as a Christian, when you obey God and you live in obedience, at Mount Gerizim, there is blessing. You actually experience the blessing of God when you live in obedience. When you live in disobedience, then you experience the cursings. And when you live in disobedience, you get cocky, you get overconfident, you don't trust God, and you break the covenant, and you sin, and you fail, right? At Mount Ebal, there is cursing, and that's why it says there's an atonement for sin. Now, if we put a New Testament lens on this, what do we see? As New Testament believers, we are in the land of grace. God has guaranteed, He's buckled us into this life of grace that we're going to go to heaven, but still we sin, we break covenant, we sin against God and we fail. And then we look at Ebal, we see the cursings, right? Notice what God says, right? He says that this law that you're going to make out of, He literally had to chisel in the entire book of Deuteronomy. You feel bad for Kenner, man. Imagine Joshua, dude. You know what I'm saying? Chisel in these laws, but he says you're going to make an altar of what? Uncut stones. Uncut stones that no man has wielded an iron tool. In other words, the law cannot be tainted by mankind. The law can only be fulfilled by God Himself. In this life where we mess up and when we fail and God is seeking out our restoration, we go to Ebal, we find our cursings, we find our failure, we find our sin, and then we see the atonement of our sins. The law completed, fulfilled by God and God alone, who is who? Jesus. As we dwell in the land of grace, until God takes us home, there will be successes when we pursue God, love God, and obey God, and we experience His blessings. But when we fail, and we fail hard, there's shame, there's guilt, and we look at our cursings, man, we see God says, I got you, my son Jesus. He's there to cover you. That drives us to deeper obedience. Obedience is not fake, it's not false, it's not behavior modification. It is looking deeply at the character of God. He did not have to save you, but He did. And He says, I have given it to you already. Obedience is not easy. Obedience requires a breaking of your will, church. It requires you to say no to yourself and to believe in the good promises of God. If your understanding of grace is that it's a convenient free meal ticket, you'll never see growth in your life. You'll go to heaven, yes, but you're not going to see real spiritual fruit taking place. So when you see the deep failures in your life, see God's restorative process working in your life. Receive and obey. Let's pray.